Dear listener, did you know that women are only 10% of the cybersecurity profession? InfoSec Women will be gathering in Las Vegas for the inaugural TiaraCon, a free 2-day conference created to advance the careers of women in the cybersecurity profession. TiaraCon is open to both men and women and will be held August 4th and 5th at Bally's in Las Vegas. See tiaracon.org for more information and registration.
To the show.
All right, here we go. Today is July 17th, 2016, and this is episode 165 of the Defensive Security Podcast, back after the long summer of a drought, I guess you might call it. We triumphantly return to your podcast listener.
It's true. Bob, by the way, I hear has successfully made it out of Turkey.
That's true, yep.
And
He's being detained in Greece, though, I've heard.
the fact that he was in Turkey during a coup, completely coincidental.
True.
By the way, I'm Andy Khaled.
Yep.
Since Jerry didn't introduce me, and I just sort of...
Well, it's been so long, I've forgotten how
I know.
to do this.
Who are you?
And I'm Jerry. Yep.
So, yeah, you're Jerry, I'm Andy. I'm Andy, you're Jerry. So sorry we took a couple weeks off there. Stuff got crazy.
Yep.
And, Jerry was traveling and I was busy,
But we're back now, and that's all that matters.
we missed you guys so much.
That's right. So, anyhow, getting into, actually, before we get into stories, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers.
It's true.
Very important to
Past,
understand.
present, or future.
Right. All right. So, getting into some stories, and some of the stuff is catch up, but I thought it was interesting to talk about anyway. The first story comes from the CBC News, which is a very unlike us to cover. A CBC News story. The title is "Antivirus Software is Increasingly Useless and May Make Your Computer Less Safe." And this, by the way, is in the wake of the really horrible, terrible, earth-melting Symantec vulnerabilities that came out, I guess, about 2 weeks ago now. And that prompted a lot of discussion about, is antivirus actually worth it? Given what we saw with this Symantec vulnerability, the fact that these were really significant bugs that actually didn't require any user intervention, you'd be better off not having antivirus if you were running Symantec in that particular case. And then when you pair that up with the fact that antivirus just isn't all that effective at protecting against malware these days, maybe that's maybe it's time to rethink your strategy. There were a couple of specific points in here. One was about some of the new features in antivirus where it will proxy TLS connections. And there's a little bit of debate about, some people saying that's just absolutely horrible and untenable, and others saying, it's a really prudent thing to do. I do think that we, as an industry, we have to be kind of cautious because antivirus is a really big threat surface. It is processing or parsing most traffic and files that are coming through, and so it's probably the most exposed piece of software, one of the most exposed pieces of software you have on your computer. And as we're, I think, finding out, it's not maybe all that well written. So I still think there's a lot of value in antivirus, particularly from just the perspective of blocking the commodity stuff and also from incident response. But, I'm slowly starting to rethink my position, but I'm not there yet.
Well, it's an interesting challenge. And this article I think is fairly good at laying out both sides of this particular debate. And I think in some ways, antivirus has become a victim of its own success. They even mention here that now what the bad guys have done is shifted towards the softer target, which is typically users. And I agree with that. And they go after some sort of social engineering or some sort of phishing attack to get a user to do something and not necessarily have to worry about throwing vulnerabilities or viruses at people. But there's more to it. We still see a ton of activity out there. And I think AV has a couple of reasons why I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, regardless of the vendors who like to say that, they're better than AV. Ultimately, antivirus protection has way too much momentum with executives and compliance and regulation regimes out there to go away. It's absolutely ingrained into most people's thinking. You must have a firewall and you must have AV, right? This was the first couple of things we had in the world of security, and it's like the first couple of words you learn in a foreign language. Man, it's tough to forget. And it's built into so many best practices and compliance, and you name it, somebody's checking to see if you're running AV. So regardless of how effective it is or not effective, I think that the feeling amongst enterprises and executives enterprises, if you're not running AV, you're probably being irresponsible with your cybersecurity, rightly or wrongly. I also think you touched on a good point, which is that AV can be very effective in cleaning up a commodity outbreak. Or you've got something unique that you get the signature or you get the sample over to your vendor, they come back with an updated signature file, and then that can help you clean it up perhaps. Is it as good as it used to be for frontline stopping? Well, that's a matter of some debate. We've got another article in here we're going to talk about a little later that quotes that a vendor like Symantec had a 100% hit rate on certain types of testing with malware. Yeah. So it's tough to know. The other thing I'll mention too is that nowadays a lot of the AV vendors are doing far more than just AV with that particular client. If they're a big combined vendor, a lot of times they'll be trying to push host intrusion prevention, host firewalling, DLP, and a number of other things into that same client that is doing AV, and the AV is an add-on. So I think like any pervasive bit of software that has excessive rights, if it could have a problem. Like if we go way back to the Target hack, their centralized management software, in theory, so we're told, for managing the software on their their POS boxes got popped and was used to push out malware. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's AD, which you rant about all the time. It's all about manageability and ease of organization and controllability. And with that comes risk.
Yeah, right? That's right.
So do I think AV is dead? No. Do I think it's useless? No. Is it enough? Hell no.
Yeah, absolutely. We have our next story talks a little bit about that too. I think you mentioned something that spurred a thought, and that is, the legal landscape. We can't lose sight of the legal landscape, especially in the context of a company. If you divorce yourself for a second from the perspective of the consumer, from the perspective of an executive or an IT manager, right? There's certainly a spirited debate to be had about whether it makes economic sense to pay the renewal fee for your antivirus. But I'll tell you what, it's an entirely different situation if you end up having a significant outbreak and something bad happens and you are not running antivirus. That's a whole different discussion than if you are. And on the one hand, you're gonna see people questioning whether or not you know what the hell you're doing in your job if you're not running antivirus. And on the other hand, you can say, well, look, we're using best in breed or nobody ever got fired for running Symantec or whatever, right? So that's the other anchor that's going to keep it around for a long time.
Yeah, I think smaller organizations are more likely to be able to play with different technologies, whether it be micro VMs, whether it be behavior anomaly detection, as opposed to traditional AV. But I think large enterprises, I just don't see AV going away anytime soon. Now, does that mean we don't have a risk and a concern like we saw with Symantec? Yeah. How often is that going to happen? I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately this comes down to any critical piece of software running your environment. You've got to have the capacity to know what's in your environment and patch it rapidly. And then you can cope with these things.
Yeah, yeah. I will say one of the I don't have I don't think this article really covers it, but I recall in this particular instance there was exploit code available relatively shortly after the disclosure, and one of the challenges that caused a lot of consternation I saw was there were a number of widely used Symantec products that had no patch available at the time. And it was, right. I don't exactly remember how long it was until there was, but it was a significant amount of time. And so that kind of goes back to the discussion we've had in the past about, think about what you would do. I haven't heard, fortunately, I haven't heard of any significant issues with, with organizations suffering consequences from that vulnerability. But I'm not sure that we would hear about it either, right? Or maybe we won't find out for 6 or 8 months. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too. That if your only reaction is to patch, you probably need some more mitigation techniques to deal with 0 days that don't have patches yet.
Yes, including in your security software. I mean, I think this is the blind spot that a lot of people don't think about. So even the mature companies, mature organizations, may have some kind of strategy for different lines of business applications, or maybe they have a big red button to uninstall Flash from everybody's computer at the same time. I don't know, but I'm going to guess that a lot of organizations probably haven't gamed that out on their antivirus.
No, I think you're right.
Anyway, moving on to our next story, which comes from CSO Online, and the title is 9 Critical Controls for Today's Threats.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So there's really, there's 9. There's one that I just wanted to beat into the ground for a second. And that is number 1, which is least privilege.
Funny. I have a ton of notes around that one, too.
So this is one of those, it's obviously a very, very fundamental concept in security, and I don't think anybody should be surprised that it is number 1, and I think we can all agree that it is super important. The problem I see is that what least privilege means to me, is different than what it means to you, and it's going to be different to every one of the 10,000 listeners we have.
Right.
And not only that, I was talking with Bob, right? And Bob was telling me, and this was before he went to Turkey, so haven't talked to him since. But he was telling me that he's seen a lot of companies get compromised because even though they think they are implementing least privilege by doing things like only opening firewall ports that are specifically allowed. The challenge is that the least privilege construct leaves things open to interpretation and doesn't have really any kind of consideration or risk. So yes, correct. It makes complete sense that we have to we need to let our employees access RDP from the internet. Well, we have a business reason, therefore it meets least privilege, and there we go.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, that's the first point I had on this is I want to quote a portion from the article. And I apologies to the author, but this is what we do on the show. So he basically says users should never be allowed to install applications on the devices. Further, applications not residing on the organization software whitelist should never reside on user devices, regardless of who is attempting to install them. And earlier, he he also says that endpoint design and access control policies often lean towards keeping users happy. This must change. While we should keep our employees productive, providing certain capabilities on devices used to process and store business information increases risks to unacceptable levels. End of quote. The problem I have with that is it's an incredibly blanket statement. The concept of what an acceptable level of risk is a very individual decision that only the people of that business should probably be the ones making. They need to know what is acceptable for them to do business, right? There is no such thing as risk-free business, and it's up to them to decide what's worth it, and then the free market will, kind of respond in kind, ignoring certain regulations and compliance issues for just a moment. So how can he say it's an unacceptable risk to allow your user to install software without knowing the business risk tolerance? The other problem here is that the user experience has to be a part of the equation as much as anything else is. And sacrificing everything to the altar of security at the cost of productivity, at the cost of user experience, at the cost of everything else, means you're going to get probably a couple of consequences that you've got to accept. One, if you lock these systems down so much that people can't do what they think they need to do, they're going to find a way to go around you, which often means a rise in shadow IT. If a sales organization cannot get done what they want to get done, I promise you they're going to find a way. And typically, if it's really hard, they'll go out and stand up a cloud instance to Salesforce and go do whatever they want to do. Secondarily, whether we like it or not, we are in competition for employees. And if I have a really unfriendly work environment as perceived by my employees, such as no BYOD, we don't have a wireless network, you can't do anything on your computer, you can't look at Facebook, you can't look at Twitter, and by God, you can't hunt Pokemon. That
Wait. You didn't go there.
No, you didn't hear that.
Okay.
Yeah. That can have an impact on losing good employees. Now, is that a fair impact? Is that something you should care about? Well, that's something that only an individual corporation can decide. So fundamentally, we in security need to facilitate business in a secure manner, not dictate to business without conversation what they can and cannot do.
Yeah,
one last way.
Sure, go ahead.
If you do go down a least privilege route with applications, you can, and there are good tools out there for it, and I like them. I'm actually a huge fan of whitelisting technologies like Bit9 or AppLock or whatever. However, here's the flip side of that. You have to know what the hell is going on in your environment to be able to do that properly. And you need to have a very responsive, well-staffed help desk to be able to respond to those requests coming in from your users. If you're not responsive and you lock them out, they'll go find another way to get things done. Okay, now I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going. That on the one hand, it's unfortunate, right? Because this is one of the few things. I mean, deep down, I agree with everything the author wrote here, right? But at the same time, as a business person, I have to wrestle with the fact that, if I want to be employed at a company, it's really, really difficult to take that flexibility away from people, and and still have a career. So figuring out that kind of middle area is the challenge we have, and I think some of the technologies like reputation, application reputation is
Sure.
a possible, but it's not perfect, right? And
no, but you could say, okay, my users can only install apps that have a positive reputation by this app reputation service. That goes a long way. And anything that has no reputation or bad reputation, they can't install. That's a good middle ground right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, especially in larger organizations, this is a really, really big trade-off between not only productivity and security, but also between cost. Because, when especially now, I think it's a different thing if you start off an organization in a controlled manner. That's one thing, right? But if you try to apply this to a really large organization, probably even a medium-sized one that hasn't had that kind of control historically, getting from point A to point B can be astronomically expensive.
Agreed.
And then you gotta ask, somebody's gonna ask the question, what was it worth it, right? I mean, did we spend $10 million to cover a $1 million potential loss? So
Yeah, and to be clear, this is an effective security control, but it is not just about the control of the security control effectiveness. There is more that goes into this equation.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the other things they have listed here, threat detection is number 2. So they point out that anti-malware, host-based firewalls, host IPS, those are all really good. But a lot of the threats that we are facing today, you have to have kind of an integrated view of the landscape. Network segmentation. Again, none of this stuff is super revolutionary, right?
I did want to talk about network segmentation.
Well, go ahead.
All he says here is just it's a necessary control to prevent access, limit unwanted access, and to contain continuity events. Great. But here's the flip side. If you really want to do proper network segmentation, you need to have really good firewalls standing between those segments, and you need to have really smart firewall admins who know their environment really well, who can micromanage that firewall policy.
Well, that and what is network segmentation? I mean, this by the way, is very much like least privilege.
Yeah.
Because I think that Target felt very strongly that they had strong network segmentation in place.
Indeed.
And so we all know what happened there, right? And that's the flip side of this, right? We can go into this thinking that we have least privilege and we have network segmentation, and then something terrible happens and we're left wondering, well, what happened? How did that happen? We followed the best practice. We segmented our networks, right? But we didn't think about what was the right way to segment. Did we actually segment? Did our segmentation make sense? And this kind of goes back to the point of, I feel like as an industry, we're the kind of the compliance mindset is,
yep.
We don't descend any further than, oh, do you have your network segmented? Yes, I do, right? But I've got 10 ports, that are allowed from, but yeah, the networks are segmented, like they're on different IP addresses,
right?
and and there's domain controllers, and they all can talk to each other, and anyway, user awareness. Another one, this is nails on chalkboard for me. Users should always understand, I'm quoting here, users should always understand what actions put the organization and themselves at risk. Clicking on email links, clicking on email attachments, sharing passwords, etc. Right? And,
just showing up to work puts the business at risk. Let's get a little more. We've been over this so many times that users are going to do what they need to do based on their incentives. Right?
Oh man, I don't know what more to say that hasn't already been said.
Well, look, the problem here that I see as well is that whether we like it or not, the average user is not a security person, and they're never going to be a security person because they got other stuff they got to get done. So we shouldn't make security our users' problem. Yes, we should educate them. Yes, we should do user awareness training. But if we're reliant upon that, we are always going to fail. There's been so many studies that have shown that phishing click-through rates are affected by the time of the day and the day of the week and the level of stress. And, there's too many variables when it comes to user awareness for it to be a truly effective control, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's I don't view it as a control, and I know this is I get into endless debates about this with people. It's really it's a minimization effort. It's not a control. It's not like a firewall. Not that firewalls, by the way, are all that awesome either, but at least they're usually deterministic, whereas people are not deterministic. And this kind of, it's not mentioned in this article, but it's kind of implied with the writing that, you want employees to think. And actually, I think in the previous article at the bottom, there were some recommendations. And one of them was, your employees should think about before they open an attachment or open an email, or, open a link on an email. And I wonder, what are you asking them to think about? And it just, by the way, this isn't even a user space versus security space discussion. I know plenty of people who are security people who fall for this crap too, right? This is a human problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say security folks are perhaps more cognizant of it because they live and breathe and do this stuff all day long, and so their brain is in that space a lot because we're forced to be in that mode of thought. But absolutely, a well-crafted phish or well-crafted social engineering will get by plenty of security folks too.
Yep. Let's see. Incident response process is number 5. Not much to say there. Web filtering, number 6. Blocking high-risk IP ranges. I'm not sure how to differentiate that from web filtering, but
well, what I would say is probably I'm a big fan of geographically based blocking of IP ranges. So if I don't need to be doing business in China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, and just block those ranges entirely, and with some tool that gets updated lists on a regular basis, and just it cuts down a lot of crap.
Yep. Manage outgoing TLS communications. Basically, the point here is you should not allow your systems on your network to communicate with the outside world through TLS.
I would read that as without you inspecting it.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, so proxy it in some way, or do a man-in-the-middle inspection of it. So the concept is if somebody's doing a TLS connection out through your proxy and you can't intercept and read that session, that's bad.
Yeah.
Now,
and super controversial.
Here's the challenge. I don't think it's controversial in a business context at all, actually. I don't think there's any expectation of privacy from a business network.
You've never been to Europe, have you?
No, I have. Okay, but in my view, from a U.S. business-centric view, there should not be an expectation of privacy on your business communications from your IT security group. However, that may be different in different countries. Now, here's one thing that I did want to point out. I agree with this recommendation, however, with some caveats. First, doing full TLS inspection is incredibly CPU intensive. So you've got to build properly for that. You can't just turn that on your average proxy and not have it bury the box. The other thing is we're actually seeing a shift away from certain cipher types with TLS that allow these sorts of man-in-the-middle inspections to ones that are basically support perfect forward security, which basically disables the capability for legitimate TLS inspection / man-in-the-middle. So that's a challenge because we're getting to a point where we either have to proxy these connections or something else. So this is a space to watch if you're doing this, that the industry is starting to shift away from the types of ciphers that allow people to do this inspection easily. So something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I wonder how the move towards cert pinning also can cause problems here, right? So because I think in the context of a business, right? I mean, it's one thing if you're talking about inspecting, inbound web traffic, and you have your TLS terminating at some kind of load balancer. That's not the thing they're talking about here. I don't think they're really talking more about the
outbound traffic,
the user space,
right?
And that usually requires you to install a root certificate on each of your endpoints, which then is on your proxy. And but it's not clear to me. I don't know. I'm not. Maybe somebody can educate me on this. What happens, like if you use Chrome, right? And you go to google.com and your proxy is trying to man in the middle of that. Does Chrome throw up all over it or not? I don't know. So
I think it has a lot to do with the settings on your proxy.
Could be.
So.
And then, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, again, that's just another one of managing your endpoints well. So I think you would have to install that certificate in all of the browsers that are pushed onto your endpoints to do it properly.
True. And then number 9 was block macros, which I was fully in favor of until I started using macros. And now I'm...
Isn't that always the way?
Yep.
See, you're an executive now, so it's all about what you want.
It's about what I want. That's right.
Make it happen.
Need my fancy spreadsheets. Come on.
Right. But, that's such a perfect example of business use case versus risk, right? That's a perfect example. It
is, yeah.
I've been having a debate about Flash in Adobe Flash and whether or not it should be present in the environment, and some people are like, get rid of it right now, and other people are like, well, we've got these 18 applications that we kind of require it. Oh, right. Sometimes there's a reason whether you like it or not.
Seems like a good idea. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next story. This is the continuing saga of Sophos versus Cylance. And this comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and the title is Antivirus Wars, Sophos versus Cylance.
We really need bumper music for
this topic. We do. Maybe like circus music.
No, it's got to be the really serious, like, breaking news. Dun, 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 dun.
I like my circus music.
All right. Tell you what, you can edit circuit music into yours. I'll edit serious music into mine.
Fair enough.
We'll be fine.
Fair enough. All right. So we talked about this a couple of weeks back now, and at the time, the perspective was that Sophos had released this horrible, terrible video that offended Cylance, and Cylance kind of smacked their business partner who aided Sophos on the nose and got the video taken down. And so now this is the kind of the next bit. I would say, it's probably, and we talked about this some, right? But even more interesting than this particular bit of mudslinging back and forth between Sophos and Cylance is the fact that there's just a lot of BS that goes on here. I'm
shocked.
I know. It's a big industry that's growing. I think they said about 4% a year, which is, it's a big industry getting bigger all the time. In this particular case, basically what's happening is that apparently, if you believe everybody in their perspective, right? Sophos is creating videos with head-to-head competitions using Cylance, and Sophos is neutering Cylance's detection capabilities so that it looks great for them. And then when Cylance produces, actually on their tour, they have the Unbelievable tour.
It's so unbelievable.
I wonder if they have that song. But anyway. That really threw me for a loop. I got that song in my head now.
Come on, see, this is me. This is your anti-heckler training, right? This is me just prepping you for live speaking.
Yes. So anyway, so Cylance has this tour where they're running around doing a head-to-head demonstration, and apparently, allegedly, one of the customers at one of these events asked to see the Sophos configuration, and Sophos, of course, was, had defaults disabled, and so when they turned it back on, then Sophos won in Cylance's own thing. And that's, again, if you believe the kind of the blog post war that's going back and forth, like none of the companies will actually talk about this. So all of the stuff that we hear is from, their own blog post about what the other company did, which is completely ridiculous. The one thing we do know is that Cylance doesn't apparently participate in any of the industry tests. But as we talked about last time, not entirely sure that's actually all that hopeful anyway, right? Because it's so I don't know. Um, it, it's it is informative, I think, to us to understand the games that are being played here.
Yeah, I would agree. There's so much FUD that's happening in this marketing and sales space around IT security vendors. It's all about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's all about trying to break into the market. It's really, really, really hard to know what to believe. Especially, if you really look at it, anytime that you're dealing with something that's testing like an AV or anti-malware tool, it's really hard to know how valid that test is, regardless of who is doing it, because that entire threat space changes so rapidly when we're talking about malware.
Right.
We're talking in the course of minutes, malware will change its signature and change how it functions and morph. So anytime you've got a staged test of any type, it's really tough to know how valid it is because that malware could be months old, days old, minutes old, years old.
Yeah, and you are absolutely right. There is there's a quote towards the bottom of the article, and they talk about how this site avcomparatives.org or .com, I don't know which one of them is probably a porn site, so sorry. Um, they had apparently a hard time getting a copy of Cylance's product to test with, but they eventually did get one through a third party. And when they compared it against Symantec, now keeping in mind that the spat here is between Cylance and Sophos, so this is kind of tangential. Cylance apparently detected 92% of exploits and 63% of in the wild malware, whereas Symantec stopped 100% of in the wild malware and 92% of exploits. Now, here's the thing. This gets down to definitions, right? When you hear in the wild malware, you should be thinking, what does that mean?
Exactly.
Okay, so to me that says, well, it's malware samples that have been collected, right, from honeypots or customers or whatever, things that people have been attacked with. But does that mean, to me it seems like they're positioning it as 90 or 100, Symantec is detecting and stopping 100% of kind of, new malware arriving in the wild. And I don't think that's what's being said here. I think, because I assume that they've had a chance to develop detection for that in the wild malware.
It's so tough to know, even if you're looking at a third-party test. But here's the reality as I see it. Somebody like Cylance is the new guy on the block. They've got to get their name out there. They've got to make a splash. So, in general, and I don't have any insider information, but in general, when I've been involved in startups or kind of new entrants that are trying to be disruptive, there's no such thing as bad press. And the marketing and the sales guys will do anything
Oh, that's a good point.
to get their name out there. It's all fair. And their goal ultimately is to get in front of a customer and get an eval going. And to get the sales guys in front of the customer. That is it. That's the entire goal of the marketing activities, is to get a sales team in front of a customer. Because they know, regardless of the strength of the tool, there are so many more considerations beyond the actual technical merit of a solution that go into purchasing decisions now.
Yeah, it's the human factor. It's the effectiveness of the salesperson. Once you get in
Absolutely.
the door, the sales process takes over.
Right.
Not the product.
And this is why sales teams are very rarely told negatives about their own products. They have to believe in their own products.
Yeah.
Because they have to sell it. And the product will get better. Don't worry. Yeah, we'll fix that in the next version. Whatever.
That's right.
So I don't know who's right and wrong here, and it's really tough to know. We've had some folks on Twitter tell us that they really like Cylance, and I've had other folks say, it's not so good. The reality is it's such a fluid environment that you probably do need to test it in your own environment to know for sure. But that's also the exact game they want, is to really truly get in front of you with their sales team. And here's the other question. Let's say you've got a 30-day eval going. What are the chances are you're going to get a hardcore AV or sort of virus attack at that particular point in time? And how are you going to test it? What's your test plan? How do you
Well,
know?
absolutely. And also, what exactly are we testing? Because
Yeah, are we testing it just doesn't add too much load to my box and doesn't blue
right,
screen the Windows server?
right. And I think from an efficacy standpoint, the concern I have is that looking at the historical performance of an particular antivirus solution is kind of like, and I know that I'm going to get some hate mail for this, right? But it's kind of like, a stockbroker making, historically that stockbroker has done a great job of picking winning stocks, but that doesn't mean that, tomorrow that stockbroker is going to pick a stock because they don't have any magic. And so that's my concern here is that, so yes, maybe Sophos has been doing awesome. But does that mean that they're going to be awesome tomorrow? I don't know.
Yeah, and that is a great point. That the landscape shifts so quickly.
So anyway, next story also comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and this is the brow-beating post. Heartbleed update, America the vulnerable. So to cut to the chase, over 2 years after the disclosure of Heartbleed, there are still 200,000 internet-connected systems vulnerable to Heartbleed, which is just amazing. So, and to put it in context, at the time of the release of the disclosure of Heartbleed, there were 1.5 million. And so, yes, on the one hand, it's gone down a lot, but not that much.
Yep.
Boy.
I think ultimately we just suck at patching. If it works, why patch?
Yeah. I did find it interesting, by the way, that one of the two, thinking back to this is kind of off topic a little bit, but one of the two companies, remembering that Google was one of the companies that disclosed it, but there was also another company that, coincidentally discovered it at the same time named Codenomicon. And Codenomicon has, fortuitously been acquired. So yeah, I'm guessing the whole Heartbleed thing probably helped them out.
Shocking.
I know it is. It's a big game. But anyway, get your crap patched. I
get ye to the patchery.
I will say, by the way, I have talked with Bob, and Bob is he's exposed to lots of different organizations' infrastructure, and there's a pragmatic problem here, right? That a lot of this stuff is old and expensive stuff, and maybe not always viewed as, what's the worst that could happen, right? I don't have $50,000 to buy another Cisco router right now, and the one I've got is end of life. Like, that's the reality we live in.
Yeah, and there's some that say, well, they shouldn't be allowed on the internet if they can't patch their stuff, and well, that's a whole different debate.
Yep, we need the county internet inspector.
Absolutely. Internet and password inspector.
That's right. Can you imagine, like, I don't know if for those people who aren't familiar, here in the U.S., when somebody's building a house, you have to, usually in most jurisdictions here, you have to put out a sign in front of the lot, or even if you're making a renovation on a house, you have to go and apply for a building permit. And there's certain key milestones where somebody from the county will come out and inspect, county or city, and if you fail, right, if something's not right, they'll put this big red sign, like, covering the plaque that you have to have posted, that, like, basically discloses that the work has stopped. And I'm envisioning something similar, like, the county internet inspector goes around to businesses and puts the big red sign on the front door saying, you got to patch your Heartbleed before you're allowed back on the internet. So anyway, moving on to the next story from Reuters. Likely hack of U.S. banking regulator by China covered up. So in the latest political hairball.
This is a weird one.
This is a very weird one. So the FDIC is a banking regulator here in the United States. Apparently, between 2010 and 2013, they were hacked, and a congressional report was just released outlining some information about the hack. Apparently, the facts that we know were that there were about, I think, 12 workstations, including really senior people, the head of the FDIC and a number of other executives, and 10 servers, which had some undisclosed data on them, were all compromised. The report makes an assertion that China was the likely source of the attack, but there's really no evidence to back that up, and China is beside themselves, offended that the U.S. would do that. Probably the most interesting and damning thing is that apparently there was an effort to quote, cover it up. Now, it's not really clear.
Covered up by the folks inside the
inside
FDIC.
the FDIC. That's right.
Yeah.
So FDIC. The context is in the U.S. different government agencies like the FDIC have leadership positions who are usually appointees of the president, but the presidential appointees have to be approved by Congress. So the Senate actually has oversight of all presidential type decisions like that. And this apparently happened. This hack happened during the time frame of the Senate approval of the newly named FDIC chief. And so the allegation is that these hacks were covered up by the FDIC and by the head of the IT group inside the FDIC to ensure that FDIC's leader was not held up in the Senate confirmation. So all that's hype. That's just what's in the report. Don't really know for sure. I will say that some of the I haven't personally read the report, but I've read a bunch of articles about the report, and it's not clear to me if there's some extrapolation happening here, right? Because there are comments in here, or kind of rough quotes that basically say the head of IT effectively told people not to talk about the incident or not to send emails about the incident. I will tell you, that's actually amongst mature organizations, that's not an uncommon thing, and it's not indicative of a conspiracy or a cover-up.
Well, it depends on who was asking, who has the authority to ask, and who they were told not to talk to. If their oversight regulatory body who has the legal right to know that information was denied that information, that's a problem.
I completely agree, and that's kind of the flip side. The challenge is, especially in the context of an investigation, and this kind of gets back to the point of, we are inextricably living in both in a new, fast developing technology environment, but we're also beholden to this old legal environment, right? And we have to live in both worlds at the same time. And one of the challenges that presents itself in the context of responding to incidents, this is something to think about really hard, and I would advise you to everybody think about this. In the process of responding to an incident, you can create a paper trail of things that may not be true, right? So
sure.
I think that and by the way, we as IT people are often very cut and dry. Like, oh yeah, China just hacked into my system, or somebody just walked off with all the data, and in fact, that may not actually be what happened. And so it is a common practice in a lot of organizations to put the kibosh on that, because you don't want to be creating a trail of stuff that's not factually correct.
Yeah, look at any sort of crisis or breaking news situation or plane crash or anything. Usually the first couple of weeks of information is fraught with mistakes and factual inaccuracies and speculation, and we want to be dealing with facts.
Right. And so I'm wondering, and I don't know, right? I don't know the full context here, but the part of me wonders if the word that what was said was basically that, look, we got this stuff going on. Let's keep it out of email, because we don't know. It just is, right? I mean, you can love it or you can hate it. It just is, people. It's the way it works. And then at some point there may or may not be a report. I can't talk to why Congress was never informed. I mean, that's probably the more problematic thing. But then I wonder, well, how did this thing come to the desk of the Congress in the first place? So there's a lot of questions I don't have answers to, but it's not a good look. But I'm concerned that there's some extrapolation happening.
So it's interesting here. If you buy that the reason the cover-up happened was to protect the job of the chairman of the FDIC, I wonder how often a similar sort of cover-up or negative feedback loop happens with CISOs and CIOs covering up bad information to protect their job, and therefore putting the company at risk. And is that a bad feedback loop that's causing that to happen?
I'm sure it happens. No idea how often it happens, but I'm sure it does. And by the way, that's a personally very perilous thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's
not recommended. Not a good plan.
Not yeah. Yeah, look, it is one thing to be ignorant and maybe bad at your job, but it is an entirely different thing to be malicious and negligent.
Here's the thing: is it malicious? Is it? I mean, what you'll hear is from an executive is we're managing the optics of the situation. We want to make sure that the right conclusions are drawn by sharing the right information at the right time, to make sure that they're managing up. We're managing our executives. We're managing our board. There's always a good reason.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sure. Look, this stuff exists on a continuum, right? But I guess my point is that if you have a statutory obligation to disclose something and you make a personal decision not to, that's on you, right? And
agreed. If
you could be an orange,
much
right?
of a cut and dried situation, but I think a lot of folks aren't.
True.
I think a lot of folks are in a.
Yes, you're right. You're right. So yeah, I mean, there may be more to see. I'll at some point go read the report and see if there's any new nuggets of wisdom I can get from it. The last story we have for today comes from the Talos blog, and the title is "When Paying Out Doesn't Pay Off." And this is a really kind of in the weeds dissertation about a particular piece of what I'll call quote ransomware. But I thought it was really interesting because I guess it was about 2 or 3 months ago I mentioned, I think the one thing that would really kill the ransomware ecosystem was if someone started pumping out ransomware that collected payments but didn't give you your files back. And so here we have a case where there's this piece of ransomware which apparently it just deletes your files, right? It pops up a picture asking you to pay 0.2 bitcoins to a particular Bitcoin wallet, and but at the time that you get that message, your files are already gone.
Yeah.
The malware doesn't actually do anything other than delete your files.
Yeah, it's fake ransomware. There's give us money, but you're not getting your files back.
Right.
But
Now,
you don't know that, right? You think you will.
well, exactly, and I think that's the thing that is likely, So again, one of those chaotic good type people, could I could see them trying to kill the ecosystem by doing something like this. Now, at the same time, reading this article, it's pretty clear that this malware sample that they detected and analyzed isn't widely deployed, so it's not really clear where it came from or how they found it. But they apparently don't see any transactions happening to the wallet. There was a transaction that predated the sample and doesn't look like it was related to this. So, and it's, by the way, the same Bitcoin wallet for all of the samples, allegedly. But it doesn't seem like it's like been widely deployed. But again, I think this is it's ultimately the thing that's going to stop ransomware is for people to stop paying.
The other ransomware gangs have got to be pissed.
Oh yeah,
because this hurts their credibility. As you pay, you get your files back, which is vital to that ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is an interesting little debate. It was somewhat inevitable, right?
Yeah,
we'll see. They may end up killing their own ecosystem before we can solve it, because it's a nasty little ecosystem. I'll tell you that.
Well, it is, and I think it's ultimately it's going to be this kind of things poisoning the well. That's probably going to really kill it. So anyway, that is the show. Hopefully, it was well worth waiting for. I definitely appreciate everybody's patience with me as I was gone for a couple of weeks, and happy to be back. And hopefully, we'll be back on a regular schedule again. So if you like the podcast, give us some love on iTunes. You can find links to all the stories we talked about today on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lurg, me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks, as always, for listening. See you soon.
Take care.